In previous episodes you saw me make the hand. The forearm. The shoulder. The last major piece to join all these together is the upper arm. This contains the bicep and triceps actuators which move the elbow. The rotation of the arm below the shoulder also occurs in the upper arm. The pattern for casting was too big to print in one piece, so I used dowel pins to join the two halves together. This peg will support one of the bearings for the elbow. A larger bearing goes on the other side of the elbow. If you're wondering why there's a hole in this part, it's because I'm going to attach this aluminium piece with a small magnet glued in to the end of the forearm. As the magnet rotates, this can be picked up by a sensor mounted in the elbow, providing positional feedback for the forearm. This is the 3D printed pattern I made for the top part of the upper arm that attaches to the shoulder. This part would be hard to cast with a sand mould. I could make a mould with investment plaster, as I've done before, but that would use up a lot of expensive investment plaster, and I've also found large moulds don't work as well with my vacuum casting setup. So for this part, I wanted to try something different. This is dry regular sand that I've put through a fine sieve. To this I'll add sodium silicate, 10% by weight. This mixture is commonly called core sand, and it's normally used to make plugs for sand moulds to produce castings with holes in, but I'm going to use it to make the entire mould. I attached a sprue and feeder to the pattern and made this steel flask to mould it in. The mixed sand is packed around the pattern. I poked multiple small holes in the sand to let gases escape, and also aid in the next stage. The sand sets hard when exposed to carbon dioxide. There is enough CO2 in the atmosphere for this to happen after a few hours to a day, but sealing it in a bag and pumping in pure CO2 makes the process much faster. Only a minute or two. The plastic can then be burnt out in the normal way, and the metal poured. The surface looks a little flaky, but the interior of the mould looks alright. Perhaps I should have used more sodium silicate. The surface did come out quite rough, and the sand did break away in one place. But it doesn't really matter, as it's going to be cleaned up and machined all over. And since it's my own design, I can just accommodate the missing part into the design. The areas that didn't clean up completely won't be visible once everything's assembled anyway. I also need to fit this top piece to the main upper arm casting. Of course, the two most important parts of the upper arm are the bicep and triceps actuators. These have the appearance of hydraulic cylinders, but it's not clear that's actually what they are. There are no visible hydraulic connections to them. Human muscles can only contract, but mechanical actuators can usually work in both directions. So one of these actuators would appear to be redundant, unless they're an opposed pair of single-acting cylinders, which would explain the lack of hydraulic lines to the bottom ends. There are a few issues with how the cylinders are arranged. The stroke is quite long compared with the internal length of the cylinder. Some of the internal length would also be taken up by the piston. There's a limit to how far the arm can flex, as can be seen on this plastic model. At just under 90 degrees, the bicep has fully retracted, the tricep has fully extended, and the arm can't bend anymore. Unfortunately, this would mean the Terminator can't do this. What the arm really needs is something like the bucket linkage on an excavator to give it a greater range of motion. But that's not how it was originally depicted, so I'm going to try and stay true to the design. I want to use electric actuators rather than hydraulics. This is one of the actuators I made for the wrist. Its stroke is very short compared to its overall length. Mostly because the electric motor is inside the cylinder. Clearly, this isn't going to work for the arm, so I need to do something different. What I came up with is a ball screw with a very short nut that's housed inside the cylinder. I wanted to use a ball screw as they are much more efficient than a regular lead screw, and also back drivable. Usually the nut on even a small ball screw is quite long and there wouldn't be space for it, so I just had to make my own. How I made this is a bit outside the scope of this already long video, so I'll do a separate video on that if you're interested. The motor is mounted to the side of the cylinder where it's mostly hidden behind the upper arm casting. I made this not at all overly complicated bracket to attach the motor and house the belt that drives the screw via a couple of pulleys. With the bicep done, next I'll tackle the rotation of the upper arm. For this, first I'll make a ring gear, similar to the one I made for the forearm. I don't need to cut teeth all the way around the gear. Humans can rotate this joint a little less than 180 degrees, so I've allowed a bit extra whilst preventing over-rotation. Now I need to find somewhere to put another motor and gearbox to drive this joint. This cylindrical projection on the shoulder could be a candidate. It looks as if it were designed for this purpose, but it's actually far too small, only about half the size of my index finger. Whilst I could put a tiny motor in here, it would result in very slow and weak motion of the arm. There would be space to put a bigger motor inside the tricep cylinder, since it's not actually required for extending the forearm. But this cylinder moves as the elbow flexes, which would make gearing it to the shoulder a challenge. Instead, I'll put a small motor in between the bicep and tricep. It's a tight squeeze, as the bicep motor is already here. I have this planetary gearbox from an old cordless drill that will work well for this. I'll just keep the gears and make a new housing for it. I'll extend the output carrier and put a gear on the end, to mesh with the ring gear I made earlier. The last part needed is the tricep cylinder. This is not powered. It's just passive. I also had to machine away part of it to make clearance for the rotation motor. This is mostly not visible from the outside.